Hola chicos, espero que estén bien. Hope you're doing well. Hoy es, ¿qué día es? Es martes, sí, es martes el 1 de diciembre. Cuando ustedes vean el video será miércoles el 2 de diciembre, pero hoy es martes el 1 de diciembre, ¿sí? So I'm making these videos about one day ahead of when you will see them. Ok, hoy es martes el 1 de diciembre y vamos a hablar sobre el sistema verbal. Spanish verbs, all sorts of fun. I will frequently ask you, especially as we get going, we start talking more about grammar, like how important do you think this is? And for this topic, I will just tell you, because you don't have really enough experience to judge like how important this is, I will tell you that this is one of the most important topics in Spanish to be understood and to understand what people are saying. So, having said that, we'll get started, but just know this, I don't do a lot of grammar because the evidence shows that doing lots and lots of grammar really doesn't help you acquire a language, but there are certain things that do, and this is one of them. So, el sistema verbal, the verb system. So much fun. So we're going to start seeing the different forms of verbs, and you might be thinking, like, what does that even mean? Because in English, we really don't have a ton of different verb forms. So English is what's called a morphologically poor language, which just means that we don't have a lot of like prefixes or suffixes. We don't have a lot of word variations like some other languages do. Romance languages have lots of verb endings, things like that. So. But English does not, which makes it easy in that sense. But then, trying to learn how to pronounce English is terrible, whereas trying to learn how to pronounce Spanish is relatively easy because everything is always spelled like it sounds. So, all right. So if you have a verb like sing in English, you'd say like I sing, you sing, he or she sings, we sing, you all sing, they sing. We have two forms of the verb sing, right? It's sing and sings. And so it doesn't really matter. I mean, even if you said I sings instead of I sing, people are going to understand you pretty well. And you don't have to memorize a whole lot because it's sing or sings. That's it. And sometimes you get into irregulars, right? Like the past tense is not singed, it's sang. And so that gets a little bit more complicated. But even then, then there's only one, right? I sang, you sang, he or she sang, we sang, you all sang, they sang. There's only one past tense verb form. For the verb to sing. So, but these are the verbs. These are the forms of the verb sing in English, and you see it's very, very simple. It's just two: sing, sings. Done. All right. Before we start seeing those forms in Spanish, there's some useful terminology. Normally, I don't teach a lot of terminology, but in this case, it is helpful because when we're talking about verbs, you won't know what I'm talking about if I don't explain these terms, and it's more efficient to teach you this now so that we're all on the same page. So, verbo infinitivo, an infinitive verb. What that means is it's a verb that does not have a subject or a tense, right? So there's nobody doing the action and it doesn't have a tense assigned to it. In Spanish, those verbs end in AR, ER, IR, okay? And it's always to whatever. So to talk, to study, to eat. Because in that case, right, it's to, and then your verb. So nobody's doing the action and it doesn't have a tense. It's not past, present, or future. It just is. It's infinite, right? Because it doesn't have a person or a tense assigned to it. So when we conjugate the verb conjugar, what we're doing when we conjugate it is we're giving it a subject who's doing the action, and we're giving it a tense. Is it past, present, or future? And in Spanish, that also means you don't have to worry about this for right now, but we also give it a mood. So in Spanish, there's like a real and a hypothetical. We are dealing entirely in reality, and Spanish 1 through 3. We're not worrying about hypotheticals yet, but in Spanish, you could also give it a mood to be real or hypothetical. But for now, we're giving it a subject and we're giving it a tense. So who's doing it? When did they do it? Or when did they do it? Is it past, present, or future? And that's what happens when we conjugate it. So an infinitive verb does not have a subject and it does not have a tense. A conjugated verb has a subject and it has a tense. All right. So Infinitive verbs in Spanish, you probably already noticed this with our vocab set for this unit. They all end in AR, ER, and IR. There are no exceptions. There are no verbs in Spanish that end with something else. All infinitives end in AR, ER, IR. Where it gets fun. And we've seen this a little bit, right, with the verb ser. So we learned yo soy de Nebraska. I am from Nebraska. De donde eres? Where are you from? Eres. Él es de Nebraska. He is from Nebraska. So we saw those different forms of ser. But that is true for every verb in the Spanish language. Every verb in every tense. So there's 6 different forms. Now, one of those forms, like we saw with the verb ser, is only used in Spain, which means that you are not going to run into that much in the United States. I always present it to you. I think I've told you this when I talked about ser. I always present it to you because when you go to college, you are very likely to have a TA or a professor from Spain. And for me, I had people that I knew that did not have any working knowledge of that form. It was sort of like, oh, now what's happening? I have no idea what's going on because they're using this verb form that I've never even heard before. So I present it so you've heard it and you know what it is and you know what it means. You do not need to know how to use it because you don't. You can use the Latin American form like everybody in the United States does. You'll be 100% understandable to anybody from Spain, and you'll at least recognize the form from Spain when you hear it, hopefully, so that it's not confusing. So 6 verbs, 6 forms for every verb in every tense in the Spanish language is a lot. But fortunately, there are some patterns that we'll see as we move through what the verb forms are. And you'll see, for example, the to form, the you form, ends in S in every tense in Spanish except for the past tense. One of the past tenses there too. The they form ends in N in every tense in Spanish, no exceptions. The we form ends in mos in every tense in Spanish, no exceptions. So there's some patterns that you can follow that will help you figure out, okay, well, who's this talking about? What ending is this? But again, 6 forms for every verb, every tense in the Spanish language. So it communicates a lot of information. All right. And I will have a handout for you when I am back to fill out this verb chart. But basically, when I'm presenting verbs, and especially when you're taking college level Spanish, you will frequently see these boxes that look like this. That's called a verb chart. These just help you kind of organize. All right, well, what is the form of that verb? And if you look in the classroom, there's my little 501 Spanish verb books or 601 Spanish verb books. If you go look at the tables in the books are presented like this, just to help you figure out, well, who's it talking about? Okay, so we already know yo is I, tú is you, ele, usted is he, she, or you formal. Nosotros is we, vosotros is you all, but in Spain. So if I were from Spain and I was talking to you as a group, as a class, I would use the vosotros form. But I studied in Latin America, so I use ustedes, which means the same thing. It means you all, but it's used in Latin America instead of the vosotros, which is used in Spain. And then ellos and ellas means they. All right. So we are going to see one today, just one verb form, which is the yo form. Remember that yo means I. And then also remember that you don't usually use subject pronouns in Spanish because you don't need to. Like we saw with ser, when you say soy de Nebraska, I don't need to say yo soy de Nebraska because soy is always referring to me. It can never be referring to anybody else because soy is the form of the verb for I, right? Just like de donde eres. You don't need to say de donde eres tú and add the tú on the end, means you. You don't need to say that because eres only means you. So it can't ever be talking about anybody else. And that's true for the rest of these verbs as well. You do not need to use subject pronouns. Native speakers will not use subject pronouns unless they're comparing between two people or for emphasis. Like in English, we do that with inflection, like, well, he slept in today, but I got up early, and you just put an emphasis on it. But in Spanish, how you do that, you don't put the verbal emphasis on it. You just use a subject pronoun instead of dropping the subject pronoun. So, all right. So the yo form, the I form. Start easy here. Okay, the yo form ends in O. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your verb here, the AR, ER, IR ending. You are going to drop that AR, ER, or IR, and then you're going to add your verb ending. So for the yo form, that means it's an O. So you have HABL, and you add O to the end. Or you have COM, and you add O to the end. Right? So drop this AR, drop this ER, drop this IR, and add your verb ending, which is O. And so you have hablo, which means I talk, como, which means I eat, and asisto, which means I attend. And we will see more forms later this week and next week. Okay, most of the verbs in our unit are regular, but there's two verbs that are irregular in the yo form, which is hacer, and the yo form is hago, and salir, and the yo form is salgo. Those you just have to memorize, and we'll work on that. But no, the thing with the irregulars is that, for example, if I say I slept 8 hours last night, that's wrong. You recognize it as, no, that's not the right form of the verb sleep. You would say I slept 8 hours last night. But if I say I slept 8 hours last night, I am 100% understandable because I am following the rule. And that is not universally true because there's a few weird exceptions, but almost always true for irregular verbs. If you do not remember, like, well, what's the yo form? And you say salo instead of salgo, it might take people a minute just because they're not used to hearing that, but that's the kind of mistake kids make when they're learning to speak Spanish as a first language. And so those are the kind of mistakes that are 100% understandable. Like, it's wrong, but it's understandable. Just like I told you with, no, I haven't told you that. Yeah, I was thinking 500, but we haven't learned the hundreds yet. But there's a lot of things, like 11 through 15. If you said 11, 12, 13, those are wrong. Those aren't the names of the numbers. But you're understandable because you're following the pattern of numbering. So even though it's wrong, it's 100% understandable. And it's the same thing for verb forms. If you have irregulars and you're like, I don't remember what the irregular form is, follow the rule. It will be wrong, but it will be understandable. And that's one strategy of making yourself understood. Okay. Now, the other verb that's irregular is ir, and you'll notice it's kind of similar to ser, which we'll see. We'll see the rest of the forms in a little bit. But ir means to go, and the yo form is voy. So our phrases like voy al cine, or ir al cine, go to the movies, or ir a la iglesia, go to church, or go lots of places, right? But the yo form is voy, and that means I go. The other thing to note about the present tense is that in Spanish, the present tense is used for almost everything, the regular present tense. So in English, we say, like, what are you, let me think here, no, where are you going? And so we have this you are going, which is a progressive. In Spanish, that's captured right here, like I am going. This means I go, or it means I'm going, or it means I do go. It means all of those things. So in Spanish, the helping verb tenses aren't used very frequently. They're used for very specific contexts. And so most of the time, if you're wanting to say, like, I am doing something, just use the regular present tense that we're learning right now. If you're asking a question, you're saying, what did you do? And you have the do support, the do to do past tense. You don't need that in Spanish. You just need the regular verb in the past tense, which we will not see until next year. So you need to worry about that. But just know, in Spanish, you almost never use helping verbs or verb support like we do in English. Just use the regular present tense that we're learning right now.